It hasn't been all sunshine and roses for Batman when it comes to video games. The character has been the subject of some truly stinky titles, but when compared to other comic book characters, he actually emerges relatively unscathed. Several Bat titles have even gone on to become seminal efforts in their own right, defining themselves not just as good comic book video games, but as great games full stop. This makes the prospect of ranking every Batman game relatively less daunting than it maybe should be. There have been some truly great Bat video games over the decades, and charting the character's evolution from panel to pixel is genuinely really interesting. So, let's get cracking. I'm Ewan, this is WhatCulture Gaming, and here is every Batman video game ranked from worst to best. Number 26. Batman Dark Tomorrow. It's only fair that since Batman is able to lay claim to starring in the greatest comic book video game ever made, then he'd also be in with a shout of being in the worst. Dark Tomorrow was developed by Kemco for the GameCube and Xbox, and by all accounts marks the Dark Knight's lowest moment in the gaming medium. Although praise must be given for the art direction and even parts of the game's narrative, which entails Ra's al Ghul trying to take over the world, Dark Tomorrow falls apart completely as soon as you have to actually play it. The camera is the first and most difficult thing to negotiate, but factor in the wonky controls and repetitive combat, and you're left with a truly abysmal title. Number 25. Batman and Robin. The collective urge to boringly savage Batman and Robin among fans has meant that the film's terrible video game tie-in has coasted somewhat beneath the radar. The game, developed and published by the infamous Acclaim Entertainment and released for the PlayStation, gave players the opportunity to explore an open-world Gotham as Batman and also made use of the Batmobile. The issue, however, was that it was a complete chore to play. Visually unappealing for the time and laden with awkward controls, Batman and Robin is far less entertaining than the film it tied into. Number 24. Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker. Batman Beyond as a concept has rich potential to be exploited in a video game, but no studio has been capable of doing so yet. In fact, the first and only attempt at making a Batman Beyond video game was Return of the Joker, which was developed by Ubisoft back when they were Ubisoft, as in there was a space in between them, for the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. Return of the Joker is not a good game. The presentation is terrible, with repetitive music and no spoken dialogue from Batman Beyond voice actors Will Friedle and Kevin Conroy, and the combat itself is the very definition of jank, with poor hit detection all around. Most definitely not Shui. Number 23. Batman Forever. Batman Forever is pretty underrated as a Batman film, but the game itself is nothing to write home about. Several different versions of Batman Forever were developed for different consoles, and all were varying levels of bad. Forever was most notable for using sprites in a similar manner to the early Mortal Kombat games, but everything else, from the graphics to the unrewarding gameplay, was fairly abject. Number 22. Batman Gotham City Racer. While it's fair to say that most players who boot up a Batman title want the complete experience, as in being able to play as Batman and all the aspects that role embodies, there's nothing to say that a title centered around just the Batmobile would be bad. It's the coolest ride in Batman's arsenal after all, and burning rubber through the streets of Gotham should be fun on paper. Unfortunately, Gotham City Racer, the only console Bat title to put the above theory into practice, was anything but fun. It was another Ubisoft title developed for the PlayStation and was once again inspired by the DC animated universe, but it ended up being a real chore to play. The Batmobile handles terribly, and the sound design is just as bad. Number 21. Batman Chaos in Gotham. Another DCAU effort from Ubisoft, Chaos in Gotham was a Game Boy Color title that put players in the shoes of Batman as he tries to quell a mass breakout from Arkham Asylum. As a handheld title, Chaos in Gotham isn't actually half bad. The story and gameplay is fairly rudimentary, but it represents the art style from the new Batman Adventures fairly well. Number 20. Batman 1986. The very first Batman video game released 3 years before the arrival of Tim Burton's Batman and was also critically well received. There isn't exactly a lot of depth to the game though. It revolves around Batman having to rescue Robin by procuring certain hidden items around the Batcave to then create the Bat Hovercraft? But it's still an admirable first attempt all the same. Number 19. Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate. Arkham Origins Blackgate was released on handheld consoles in 2013 and served as a sort of companion piece to Warner Bros. Montreal's main Batman Arkham Origins title. Set a few months after the events of the console game, Blackgate sees the Dark Knight attempt to quell a riot in Blackgate Penitentiary, which sees him come up against the likes of the Penguin and Joker, and also his first encounter with Catwoman. Boss battles were a definite highlight, just like they were in the main Arkham Origins, but the game was way less vibrant, with free-flow combat in particular taking a massive knock in the leap between platforms. Number 18. Batman Arkham VR. Set in between Arkham City and Arkham Knight, Arkham VR does what it says on the tin by literally putting players in Batman's shoes. It's the first and only Arkham title to adopt a first-person perspective and entails no combat of any kind, just good old-fashioned detective work. VR is still in its infancy as a true force in the medium, but Rocksteady were able to deliver on the promise of an immersive Batman game with their latest contribution. It's not without its issues, and it's not going to convince VR skeptics it's worth trying, but it's still decent all the same. Number 17. Batman the Caped Crusader. Following the release of their first Batman game in 1986, Ocean Software set to work on a follow-up, which came to be known as Batman the Caped Crusader. The game isn't the most action-oriented Bat title, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Emphasis was placed on puzzle solving and presentation, with the Caped Crusader emulating the panels of a comic book instead of having all the action take place on one screen. Number 16. LEGO Batman 3 Beyond Gotham. LEGO Batman 3 is absolutely a fun game and includes all the classic LEGO humor you could want in one of these titles. It also boasts a massive roster of DC characters, several open worlds, and some really fun themed DLC. The bad thing is, it's also stuffed with bizarre celebrity cameos and that frustrating rotating split-screen feature all new LEGO games seem to love, making the prospect of couch co-op about as appealing as being locked in the Bat G-Force simulator at maximum velocity, i.e. not very. Number 15. LEGO Batman 2 DC Superheroes. DC Superheroes doesn't manage to execute all its plans flawlessly, but it's still a wonderful love letter to Batman and the other characters of the DC universe. It comes with an open-world Gotham, plentiful vehicles to drive, and some diverse stages too. Sadly, it also marks the first occasion where TT Games opted to use voice actors over those lovely little LEGO noises we were also endeared to. Not a deal breaker by any means, but a little change that made the series just a little bit less unique. Number 14. Batman Returns. While Batman 1989 is considered something of a seminal classic for the SNES, Batman Returns wasn't considered a massive step up. The SNES version of the game drew solid reviews, but the same could not be said of the one developed for the Sega Master Force, which critics noted paled in comparison. Number 13. Batman Begins. To the game's credit, Batman Begins understood that a fully immersive Batman video game had to be both action-oriented and stealthy. Combat wasn't anything exceptional, but it did the job and served as a neat entree to the game's main gimmick, a fear meter which could be built up over time through stealth and allow players to take down an enemy with one blow. There's nothing in Begins that other non-Batman titles of the era already did better, but it is perhaps underrated when compared to the Caped Crusader's other video game adaptations. Number 12. Batman the Brave and the Bold, the video game. Batman the Brave and the Bold is a god-tier cartoon that actually inspired a pretty fun video game for the Wii back in 2010. The series was heavily inspired by the Silver Age of DC Comics and saw the Caped Crusader teaming up with all manner of DC heroes. The game follows suit, allowing up to 2 players to play as Batman and Robin or as many of the other guest characters who appear in each episode. It's genuinely quite overlooked. Number 11. Batman 1989. It's only right that one of the greatest comic book movies ever made had an equally impressive game to follow it. Sunsoft would arguably perfect their Batman formula in their next effort, Return of the Joker, but the movie tie-ins shouldn't be written off either. It's superbly presented for one, and while the NES version in particular was notorious for being especially difficult, the studio was able to convey the spirit of the movie fairly well. Number 10. Batman Rise of Sin Tzu. Batman Rise of Sin Tzu was Ubisoft's final Batman video game and also the last to be based on the DC animated universe. It wasn't the most incredible note the publisher could have ended on, but for those players after another DCAU adventure that they could play with a friend, it's well worth checking out. Rise of Sin Tzu is an action beat-em-up that allows up to 2 players to take on the role of Batman, Nightwing, Robin, or Batgirl. Sin Tzu himself was created especially for the game by superstar DC artist Jim Lee, and while they were quickly forgotten about shortly after its release, the novelty of seeing a new villain in the new Batman Adventures art style, plus getting to team up with a friend for a new DC AU story, is actually pretty fun. Number 9. Batman Return of the Joker. Batman Return of the Joker improved on pretty much everything from Batman 1989, divesting from the style seen in the Tim Burton movie and going for a more comic-accurate look instead. Sunsoft's title retains the previous entry's side-scrolling shooting action with a fresh lick of comic book paint. The only major downside is that, unlike the 1989 game, combat is literally all just firing projectiles at your enemies, which isn't particularly Batman-y when all is said and done. Number 8. Batman the Telltale series. One of the final releases from Telltale before the studio's untimely demise in 2018 was also one of their best. Simply called Batman the Telltale series, the game saw Telltale apply their signature adventure game style to The Dark Knight, divesting from the source material in a great many ways, but ultimately coming up with a fascinating narrative that both casual and hardcore Bat fans weren't able to predict. The emphasis on action in some places was a tad boring, but ultimately Telltale were able to make both Batman and Bruce Wayne 2 sides of the same compelling coin, including plenty of mystery and weighty decisions for players to have to make. Number 7. Lego Batman the video game. Part of what makes the first LEGO Batman so great isn't just that it retains the humour of the series' formative offerings, but the actual atmosphere of the game itself. TT Games were able to use Danny Elfman's iconic score for Batman 1989, and it serves as the perfect backdrop from start to finish, thanks to the studio also delivering some of the best levels of any of their LEGO games. Throw in a gigantic roster of Bat characters to play as, and a story that divides its time equally between the heroes and villains, and you have an all-time LEGO-themed classic. Number 6. Batman Vengeance. By now, you should be able to tell that most of Ubisoft's Bat titles were fairly terrible, which is made all the more frustrating by the fact that not only were they based entirely on the DC animated universe, aka the actual coolest thing ever, but also because Batman Vengeance is actually a really damn good game when all is said and done. Vengeance isn't able to match the lofty heights of Batman Arkham, but as a continuation of, or prequel to, the new Batman Adventures, it's genuinely strong. The game relays the series' dark tone and art style perfectly, features all the renowned voice actors from the show, gameplay that's surprisingly immersive, and an absolute ripper of a story that kicks off with the actual death of the Joker. It's essentially just one long episode of Batman the Animated Series, complete with episode titles and some fantastic presentation. What's not to love? Number 5. Batman Arkham Knight. Rocksteady pulled out all the stops for their final console Batman game, innovating on all the key pillars of the Arkham formula that had made previous efforts Arkham Asylum and City so successful, all while taking the Unreal Engine to, well, unreal territory. Seriously, despite releasing at the beginning of the last gen, Arkham Knight more than holds up and blows most of the titles released even as recently as last year out of the water. The level of detail is frankly ridiculous, which is why it's a shame you spend most of your time in the game inside the Batmobile, or just despairing at the many odd creative decisions taken with the story once you exit the first act. Throw in controversy surrounding an unplayable PC port and an equally controversial season pass, and you're left with a game that, while great, probably wasn't the note the series should have ended on. Number 4. The Adventures of Batman and Robin. It's important to be specific here because the Sega Genesis version of The Adventures of Batman and Robin was not good. The version developed for the SNES by Konami, however, that's a true Batman classic. A side-scrolling action platformer, Konami's adaptation of Batman the Animated Series was simple yet effective, allowing players to play the Caped Crusader in levels directly inspired by episodes from the show, including the amusement part from the episode Be a Clown. Number 3. Batman Arkham Origins. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that Batman Arkham Origins might be the most underrated Batman video game ever made, more so than Batman Vengeance. You see, on its own, Arkham Origins is a superb Batman video game. It boasts by far the strongest story in the entire series and an incredible soundtrack to boot, but one aspect of the prequel that is constantly overlooked is just how innovative of a game it is. Origins made several improvements across the Arkham formula, providing new enemies to spice up free-flow combat for starters, but by far the two biggest were the new boss battles and the additional detective sequences. Origins bosses built upon the killer Mr. Freeze encounter from Arkham City and easily outshone Arkham Knight, while the crime scene investigation aspect also provided something that was sorely lacking in the previous two Arkham installments, seeing Batman do actual detective work. Number 2. Batman Arkham City. Batman Arkham City was Rocksteady's second Batman title, but it's also their second best Batman game. That might seem a little weird to say, given City innovates in pretty much every area and delivers one of the tightest, most enjoyable gameplay experiences seen on the 7th generation of consoles, but it isn't the perfect package. I don't want to dwell too long on the negatives given City is such a banger of a title, but it's necessary in order to better qualify why it nabs the runner-up position and not the top spot. Narratively speaking, City just isn't perfect. The game does nothing with Hugo Strange's discovery of Batman's true identity, and there are clear moments where you can tell story cuts were made. Bruce's knee-jerk decision to choose Talia over the thousands of other people in Arkham City in the final act the most notable. That doesn't take away from City's shine though. The game is still a superb offering filled to the brim with secrets and references, made all the better by the additional playable characters like Catwoman, Robin, and Nightwing. And number 1, Batman Arkham Asylum. The Arkham franchise was undoubtedly improved upon gameplay-wise with each installment, but there's just no matching Rocksteady's Dark Knight debut when it comes to both style and substance. When that first teaser for Arkham Asylum dropped with the home release of The Dark Knight, expectations weren't exactly high. Rocksteady only had one previous game to their name, a little-known FPS called Urban Chaos Riot Response, and the Caped Crusader was yet to receive a title truly worthy of the license. But the more that was shown of Arkham Asylum, the more optimistic fans began to get. The game had a bold art style, brilliant presentation, and a compelling mix of gameplay. It also had BTAS writer Paul Dini crafting the story, plus Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, and Arlene Sorkin returning to voice Batman the Joker and Harley Quinn respectively. The end result was something phenomenal, a sort of Die Hard-esque take on the Caped Crusader that trapped the player on Arkham Island with all of Batman's greatest adversaries. It makes for a more claustrophobic experience than the later Arkham games, but that's also partially why it remains the best. And that was every Batman video game ranked from worst to best. Which one's your favourite? Let us know in the comments below, and please don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and to subscribe to WhatCulture Gaming so you don't miss another upload going forward. I've been Ewan, and I will see you next time. Bye!